Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Entra Chat. This week I have an entire V team I worked with over the last year, 1 year plus, working on my day job, building out the Zero Trust assessment. These are the folks, and there are many more who we don't have on the call today, who have been instrumental in building the Zero Trust assessment, and we just shared it this week. There's been so much amazing feedback, and we are loving reading all the comments and hearing what people are saying about it. So we are sitting together with some of the key people. Tarek, who leads the overall Zero Trust team. We have Sarah and John from the docs team. We did something really unique here with how we wrote the docs and the tool. And we have Ravi from the Intune team, because it's Zero Trust. It's not just identity. So welcome, everyone. Tarek, so even I don't know this, right? What's the origin story for the assessment? All I know is you told me one day, hey, we want to build this assessment. We did the whole Azure AD assessment. I don't know how it started or who started it or whose idea it was.
There's a side story here that Merrill started off as maintaining bug fixing. He started off as in the mail room, and he made it all the way up to to lead the V team on the execution side. So thanks for the question, and welcome everyone. I am a lead architect in something called the customer engineering team. I know some of you may have seen me before in previous episodes, but just for context. And yes, we do work together as a group here on the Zero Trust to deployment V team of Microsoft, trying to deploy customers end to end. The origin of the assessment was a man named Ramiro Calderon. So I'm the lead architect. He was the second architect. Me and him basically were the first two architects in the team together. And this origin story is something I think many of your listeners will relate to, which is, so we're the customer engineering team. So we work directly with customers. You get assigned a customer, you work with them on deploying, whether Entra or Intune or Purview or whatever. You learn, you bring the insights back to engineering. We're free. We don't charge the customer nothing. We learn, they learn, we move them faster. Everybody wins, right? We iterate faster, we learn. And famously, there was this very big and very sophisticated customer, right? And they had all these kind of constant requests from Entra. We need you to do this better, do that better, this better, that better. And then 2018 or so, 2017, 2018, they got breached because they just had passwords on MFA, on their global admins. That's it. Remember, we're sitting in the CAT team, the customer experience team. We're saying CAT is short for customer acceleration team. We're like, okay, did no one ask them if they were doing MFA for the? We felt bad. I mean, obviously a customer owns their posture, but we feel like we're the trusted advisor. We're working with them on all these advanced, app migrations, conditions, and we never asked them, and so we kind of resolved at that point. And Ramiro's kind of very structured in his thinking, and our dear colleague Ramiro is not here. He's enjoying Dubai chocolates. So I'm here representing him. It would have been amazing to have him over. And he's a very disciplined guy. So he's like, you guys know him, right? And so he's like, no, we should have a tool that people can run at the beginning of kind of their engagement with customers to just check for this comment. Are you even doing MFA for you? Let's just not do that again, okay? And so that's how it started from. And shortly after he started, Ehud, the second architect who joined the team, came in, and he kind of helped us with the data crunching, and he had a very strong background from Power Platform, so it became even better. But as you said, it was a super focus on Entra, so I think most of your followers and fans will know the Azure AD assessment from GitHub and so on, and that's where it started from. Of course, we're always thinking how we give this goodness to the rest of the world. We never want to make a tool that's, when you're part of the CAT program, you get this special treatment and you get this really awesome tool, but nobody else knows about it. Because we're not a paid offering, right? We're just engineering it. We want the goodness to the rest of the world. So that's where it started from. We added about 15, 20, I don't know, someone will correct me, 25 checks in the base assessment. I think John even worked with us back then on some of these recommendations. And it was pretty much the same, right? And that's when Merrill joined us in 2020, we put him on maintenance. Hey, some people sometimes find bugs, can you fix them? And let's move from PowerShell 5 to PowerShell 7 or whatever. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then, I think when the Zero Trust deployment V team kind of was started in around 2020, 2021, is when we started thinking about how do we take this further. So we added a bunch. Our dear colleague who's also not here, but a big contributor to this, Clay Taylor, who Ravi is going to tell you all about. He worked with us to add 15, 20, 25 checks on the Intune side as well. And it stayed that kind of way until, as you said, a year and a half or so. It's been longer than you think, Merrill. It's not 20 years old. In which, within Microsoft, we had the SFI push, right? So some of your listeners are familiar with the Secure Future Initiative, in which we found that there's a lot more we can do to secure a tenant. Not we found, we realized how important it is to just do it, right? And so we decided this assessment is not doing enough. And we really, the big focus, and we know here in the B team, is we really need to do the per object checks, right? Not just, oh, look, do you have B2B invitations turned on, yes or no? Let's start looking at the user's authentication. Let's start looking at the per individual apps. Do they have secrets or not? And just surface this to you. And so that was the big pivot, obviously. And it's a lot of effort and a lot of time to get there. And I think that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this. But that's the background for everybody.
Oh, yeah, it's been a fascinating journey. When I joined the team and I found I can use some of my dev skills as part of the team, and I sort of instantly latched onto it. One of the key things I feel in the assessment we did is the entire sort of the docs process. And I have here two superstars. There are many others more. A lot of the things people tell me is like the Entra docs, they are so good. Some of the things we've done, like when we launch a new feature, the comments I get is like, I was able to just read this doc and really understand it. Like something that Microsoft does really well with how we explain things, how we break it down in the docs. It's not an easy task, right? It's easy to just throw everything technical out, and then it's really hard for people to follow, or have it really simple and dumbed down and you're not really getting much value out of it. John, you've been in some of the key Entra stuff. John, Sarah, do you want to share like some of the docs you worked on, your handiwork for people to know?
Yeah, I think we got pulled into this May of 24. I've been through 4 managers in that time period. And we got pulled in, and it was like, hey, the product team wants us to document what's the best practices for everything. And so we've been through probably a dozen or more iterations of how we might make this work. And so I have a background as an IT pro in a previous life, and this really resonated with me. And we've done some really cool things that I think we'll get into with how we're doing the docs. But my feature focus areas are zero trust and conditional access, and end-to-end scenarios is really what I excel at working on. But Sarah's one of my peers. Sarah's been really instrumental in helping out with this.
I joined this party a little bit late, so just kind of found this, big bundle of content and all of these checks and all of these stories to kind of wrap my head around. But I started off looking at just the logs, content and identity protection, because at the time that's what I was working on. Audit and sign-in logs may not be the flashiest of things, but everybody has to use audit and sign-in logs. So it was really cool to see, okay, well, this is what they're really looking at for the logs and how that's going to be a part of these checks. And then it just became really diving in. And like you said, there's once you start looking at the granular checks themselves, and they feel similar, they sound similar, but man, they're each one very, very unique. Takes getting into the details to be able to see that.
100%. Yeah, we have like various different variations of the test, and we wanted to give people credit if they did part of it and not the other. So we went into that sort of granular levels in that. Yeah, and we'll jump more into the docs soon. Ravi, Intune side, you've done an amazing work. We, like, people don't know, we spent a lot of time on Entra because we were initially going to launch with just Entra, right, Tarek, for the very first version that was going to launch. And then we had Ravi come into the team, did an amazing job writing up all of the Intune side of the story to have truly have the zero trust side of things. Ravi, how did you see it, taking the things that you do, you help with customers and bringing those into the assessment?
Yeah, probably a bit of background first. So as Tarek was mentioning, Clay Taylor, who was the original architect from the Intune side. So we've had this workshop for more than 2 years, or around 2 years, right? So we go and work with customers, and with this new ones, we definitely wanted to automate and really be able to check a lot of configurations automatedly. So Meryl, when the team, obviously you team, Tarek reached out, Meryl reached out, like you guys reached out, I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. But what was also probably a little bit of intimidating, I would say, from my side, is when we jumped on development of the tool, and then the information was, hi, we already have about 60 checks ready for identity, and then we have this 2-3 months, and we need to now roll out these devices checks. What I would also say is probably as part of the development of the devices checks, what we had to do is if you look at the previous version of it, now there's a web version of the tool, Excel tool, as well as the desktop version of it. A lot of exercise was really going into to the current manual checks and really sorting out which would be the most valuable checks that we can do it automatically.
Yeah.
That we should bring into the new tool. So I would say, yeah, I'm very happy with what we have built so far. A lot of learning, and I think it's going to be really helpful for a lot of customers that use Intune.
100%. Yeah. One of the questions we get when we start off with this and show the assessment to people is there's already secure score, there's already the identity score, and then there are things, even in the announcement, it was mentioned about the CISA, they have the scuba analyzer, and there are already lots of industry related things. Where does the zero trust assessment fit into all of this?
I'll give my opinion. There's no canonical answer from Microsoft as a whole, but how we reason about it in the team is, on the one hand, the CISA framework will be what the CISA needs for the compliance of federal agencies and so on. And that may not work for a small law firm or a retailer or someone like that. So what we try to do in the assessment is going to give the Microsoft purview, first of all. Obviously, secure by default, secure by design, all these best practices. But also, like, for example, someone may, in some engine, or I don't want to, like, for example, CIS might say, turn off B2B altogether. Okay, maybe that makes sense in an infrastructure tenant in which you're hosting Azure critical infrastructure. It makes sense. But for a customer normally who collaborates with others from other tenants, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So we try to also strike a balance on what we think as Microsoft is good, but very well informed from SFI. From what we know, we've learned from these different various compromises we see in customers, and we learn from Mystic, from other places where we see, and we try to obviously do for ourselves. But as we meet with customers, say, good for you, Microsoft. What about me? How do I get this goodness that you guys are so clever? You figure out how to secure yourselves. How do I secure myself? So that's how we reason about it. Entra and other products have secure score, have recommendations. It's just their burden of running a cloud service with checks is much higher than ours. We're able to iterate quickly, really give you something in PowerShell that you can run within a context as a global admin. We download the data on your server. We can talk about some of the mechanics, right? And you have a local DB that does some of this analysis and gives the answer quickly. Versus for a product group to make that same check, they have to run a cloud scale service that scans all tenants, stores the data privately in a great way. So their ability to produce checks has always been like, a quarter of ours. Just the number of engineers working on that problem versus us. So there's an agreement between us and engineering that we will do our very best to give to the customers as quickly as possible what they can use to secure themselves. And they will take the best and the brightest of our checks and try to put them in their product over time. So you'll see some of this light up in the product as well.
Yeah, I think historically we've seen, right, some of the existing from the Azure AD assessment, there are various sorts of checks that have made their way into
most common, the credential
score.
check, for example, I think they took from, and then they operationalize it much better than we do, but it took them a year, for example.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to add just one piece there too, is we've tried to, as we write the content, also think about it from a perspective of, you may not be a Microsoft customer, but these are written in such a way that you can look at them and go, based on my provider, I'm configured in a good way, or I'm not configured in a good way. And I can kind of interpret these for whatever provider you might be on if you really wanted to go down that path.
When we look at the assessment and the pillars, it gives us, like, there's the overview that we create that gives an overview about the tenant, the configuration. People really like the Sankey charts that show what's happening in the tenant. It gives some different insights, which we normally don't get. I have some of my favorites. What about you folks? What do you like about those Sankey charts, and what sort of new insight does it bring from a zero trust perspective? in that overview dashboard?
I can go first, definitely. So I would say from the devices perspective, a lot of times customers do know how many are actually what they try to assess is how many devices do they have, how many compliant and non-compliant devices do they have. But what this overview page of the tool does is right away says how many devices, unmanaged devices you're bringing. So obviously gathers data from Intune and obviously gathers data from the sign-in side as well. And that I think is really very insightful for customers because Intune says, hey, this is how many non-compliant devices you have, and this is what customers focus on. I need to go and look at 2,000, 4,000, 300, whatever non-compliant devices they have, I need to go and remediate it. I think what's super important is to really be able to find out non-managed devices completely and be able to really manage them and secure them as well. So that's definitely one of my favorite things that I think a lot of customers will find super useful.
So I just want to add, so some of your listeners may know that I care a lot about passkeys. I post a lot about passkeys, and phishing resistance. And I would, our former colleague Daniel Wood was commenting about how, they love the Sankey chart for phishing resistance. But I actually want to say +1 to Ravi because two problems that I commonly see in my customers. Right? So one is the fact that you get the Sankey chart for how many are managed, unmanaged, or are non-compliant. And then you get the other Sankey diagram of how many of them are in CA versus non-CA. That's one crime we see all the time. Customer endpoint team does so much work to get you to force you as an end user to install a company portal and do all this, and then they don't use it in conditional access at all. What the hell? Yeah. That's such a low-hanging fruit. Just push the button, right? Just push out all the devices you don't want. You got the devices you want, fix that, right? But I also like the one about managed, unmanaged, and non-compliant because I work with customers who use a lot of VDI, for example, and VDI tends to be registered as a device and then left behind, and then they end up running out of quota because they keep leaving all these other devices they never cleaned up because they keep registering devices and never deleting them. So this helps you see the problem before it happens. That, I've got all these abandoned devices here that I haven't checked in weeks, months, years, because of course they're VDI, they're ephemeral.
Yeah.
And so they're never going to come back. Actually, they did come back, but they came back as another device and you just didn't know it, right? And so helping them see that. So I think you'll start seeing your unmanaged balloon or your hybrid even balloon. Like, what is all this hybrid device on my VDI? So just visualizing the problem. A lot of people, because the IAM team who has the quota doesn't look for devices ever. And then the endpoint team are happy with the managed devices and not looking at the dead device. So I think it's a good call out, a big win for us to have that kind of visualization. I really like
I think that also speaks to the fact that, like John was saying, that it was kind of product agnostic. There's a certain amount of hat role agnostic too, right? Anybody who's working in any kind of role within an IT organization could still read through these and see, okay, this applies to this area, but it does have crossover here. So we try to bundle things together based on the SFI pillars kind of to create a category for it, but it's by no means held to that just one little bucket. It's pretty broad, and I think it's exciting to see that how big all of this identity and the devices, how much overlap there is. It's a huge responsibility for sure.
Yeah, I'll +1 to basically everything that everybody has said. It's such a great tool, and having been on the other side of the fence and been an IT
but
pro
you're biased towards
previously,
MFA, aren't you? You're biased towards
I'm biased toward conditional access. I don't know. I mean, I write the content for that area too. I previously wrote for authentication methods, so I'll add on to the auth methods, being able to see, especially those phish-resistant credentials. But having been a desktop manager before, having all of this information just in one spot to be able to run an assessment and just get a quick snapshot. I mean, yeah, it can run for a little while, and I think we'll probably get into that if you're really big. But it's a great way to run a tool and see all the things, and you can look back after you've done some config changes and see that chart in the upper right corner go up with the number of past tests every time. Hopefully that number goes all the way to the full number of each check. And
for those
you've
completionist gamers,
by the time you're done.
It's really going to appeal to your senses. Yeah. Gotta hit every dot on the map, right?
Not that Sarah's a completionist or anything.
Yes, obviously, unmanaged devices definitely stands out for me. The second one, what John was mentioning, is just the overview of it. So when I start working with, let's say, new customers, a lot of times I actually don't know the environment and I spend half an hour just to really understand the environment. And if they have run this tool and I see the overview page, it tells me how many guest accounts do they have, how many actual on the cloud accounts do they have, how many privileged accounts do they have. And then it goes into devices I'm more concerned about Intune. So it tells me right away, yes, I can go and look into Intune and really find out this information. But just in one page, I get to know the Windows devices, when it Windows, how many hybrid and intra-join devices, macOS devices, iOS and Android devices. So just the overview at a glance that I get to see the tenant, both Entra and Intune, is just amazing. It saves so much time. All the information is there, but it saves heaps of time.
And that one or two Linux devices there at the very bottom of the device summary.
It barely shows up in the line.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's, I think, a lot of value I've seen, the comments the feedback I'm seeing as well. We focused a lot on enterprise customers and others when we built this, but for a lot of consultants and lots of folks in the Microsoft sphere who help customers, people are running MSPs to consultants, this gives them a really good quick snapshot overview, and without needing to ask for access into every tenant and lots of privileged permissions, they can ask the customer to run this, and then they can jump on a screen share and look at the report, and it gives them like a single place to see that overall picture in a really quick time, and even for the customer to understand, right? A lot of the times when we do these workshops, there's always like, oh, what do we have? Do we have this? Or someone will say, we don't have guests in our tenant. But then when we go figure out that they actually have, because IT didn't like officially do anything, but people have been inviting guests and they're always surprised to see those numbers. So tell us how you build these tests.
So for Intune, to be specific, we have 182 configuration that we check with customers, and each configuration would say, do you follow the zero trust principle for that specific configuration? So the first step was to really prioritize which one would be most valuable. The customer would really learn something new about the tenant that they did not know, and also critically, that would increase that security posture of their tenant, of their environment. So the first step was to really sort out of 182 checks that we currently do it manually, as to which one would we do. The second step was, obviously we did not want to pick from only one category and build all the checks. For example, is Intune tenant checks that we needed to do. So there are, let's say, 30 odd for Intune tenant. We didn't want to just go and only check Intune tenant and just completely leave data, devices, and in devices, macOS, Windows. So first step was to prioritize. Second step was to sort out and ensure that we're checking at least all the high events from tenant side, from protection of the data and protection of the devices. And once we found that, once we sorted it out, that what checks out of 182 we're going to build as part of the phase one, the time-consuming part was to really go and start digging into APIs, where exactly within Intune tenant that configuration resides that I can pull using APIs and really validate if it is as per Microsoft, as per the best practice. Does it follow the zero trust principles of least privilege and assume breach and other? So that was actually the time consuming. And once we have built that, the exact APIs, discovered the APIs, discovered how we can really validate it, discover the endpoint, find out the configuration, then doing a validate. And the last bit was, I would say, the next step was to really code it. Once we code it, the step doesn't finish. We need to start testing it. If the check is positive, correct. Negative as well, correct. Validate in small tenant as well as large tenant as well. If we wanted to be able to really scan through all the profiles and be able to really not time out, and then work with some of the private preview customers. So there were multiple steps involved, from really sorting out and really finding out the most important checks to really be able to create the API, find out the APIs, document it, coding it, and eventually really working in our environment and customers' environment to validate all those checks were ready. Tarek, I see you want to say something.
No, I think on average, to give our kind of listeners understanding, how long would you say one check would say? Take 12 hours, maybe? I don't know. Just throwing a number out there.
I wouldn't put it any less than 12 hours, Tarek. You're spot on. From being able to sort.
Just specking, or also you counting coding? Because I think I was going to ask Meryl about coding. Just the specking
No.
part, right?
The specking is not just specking. So yes, it is
Yeah,
starting
specking and
from
checking
finding
and the APIs
and working with devs, troubleshooting, like
after
troubleshooting
they
the
try to
code,
code it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
testing in our environment and testing in customers' environment. So you're pretty close. I would have
Yeah.
definitely give it
You can
12
also
hours.
more even if you want. That's fine.
No.
Yeah.
And all along the route, docs is involved, product teams are involved. So we've kicked things back to the product teams as well, where like we had a check that relied on a write permission, and we sent that back to the PMs, and we're like, why does this require a write access to read a role? And so we've kicked bugs back all the way to the engineering teams for them to go fix things that we're finding as we've been writing these checks.
So
And tests
that's an
as well.
interesting one, John. The whole role. This was for PIM eligible roles, finding out who was privileged. So I went and we resolved it. What actually happened is there was an API which just used read access, and you could get it. Like PIM has lots of different stores
APIs.
that you would pull from. So there was an API call that you would use to get it and get that information. The documentation in the Graph API docs was pointing to a different API as the one to use, and that needed the read write. So we went back and forth, and then we sat with the engineering team as well, and they said like this is the one to use. So we actually fixed it. It was more like a doc fix that we had to do.
It's always John's
because
fault, yeah.
But it's also, I mean, it's all part of the thing. It's everyone has had a part in this.
Well,
Yes.
I was
We've
getting to
had
that. So I'm
docs
actually building
writers,
up to that.
engineers.
So John,
Yeah.
he spent 12 hours with his specking. Meryl, how
Yeah.
much does the developer spend to actually code it? And John, how much work is it on the doc side, or Sarah?
Yeah, we'll jump a lot into the
Sure.
docs, but I'll just quickly talk about the dev side of it. The dev, it would range. We had some tests which were simple, like just check this one setting. Those usually you could do it with, in about few hours, and then you test it against the different tenants. Testing usually takes time. We need to test against our production tenant, our production meaning like a demo tenant, a dev tenant, then the different clouds we tested with GCC and different environments, different API calls. So that took time. The Intune ones were really hard because Entra is easy. You just create a conditional access policy. It's fine. You can just test it, right? With Intune, you don't have that. You need to enroll a device. You need to get that stuff in, then be able to create the policy. So it's a lot more involved with Intune than a lot of the Entra things. Intune was a lot harder to test because you had to make sure the negative cases were correct, right? Have those different sort of configuration. So that depending on the type of test, it takes some time. There were some which were very complex. We look at Azure, we look at like 5 different places, conditional access, auth methods, bring all of that insight into one test. They took like sometimes 3 days to write and call in the different APIs and figuring out that. We had some which had lots of performance. It was very intensive. It would have taken, to run one test would have taken like 10 hours, even in a sort of medium-sized tenant. So those tests, what we did is once we found the first negative, we stopped testing anymore, and we said, okay, we found one role that has this issue, so you need to go fix it. We didn't like do the whole thing, but we are obviously driving that feedback into our engineering teams, etc., to see how we can improve on those. John, so docs is very unique, right? Like we did something very different here, which we have not done before. Tell us like what it is and how docs comes into that.
So
play.
with the sheer number of checks that we've come up with, we're at 99 written checks within Microsoft Entra. Putting them all in one document was never going to work. Writing them and just having an infinite scrolling document was never going to work. We went through multiple iterations as we started playing around with things, and we landed on creating include files for every single test. If you go look at our repo, you'll see them all named as the number of their ADO item that exists in our tracking environment. And each individual check has an include file that is structured exactly the same. And then we've pushed that pattern over to the Intune team as well. And they are writing their checks the same way. using the include file, using the same format. We have title, we have the risk information is in hidden attributes in the metadata block as well. And all of that information then we can pass over to you, Meryl, and you can ingest that into the tool every time you go to build. What shows up in the tool and what shows up on our documentation are exactly the same and are synced every single time we add a new check, every time you do a new build, they get synced up. So we can make changes as we go. All of our links that we put in the docs all surface up in the tool. And so we're able to match those things up in a way that we've never really done this before, having the tooling literally refer to the content, not just a learn more link, not just a, hey, go to docs and go find this stuff. You can read through the doc and do all the work yourself manually, but we've now pointed back to the assessment tooling where, hey, if you want to read through and do all this stuff on your own, great. If you want to run an automated tool that's going to spit out the specific checks that you need to go focus on, go run that tool. And it's really amazing to me the progress that we've made and where we've come from all manual to
And it
now
also has
automation.
created, it
It's great.
allowed for like way more flexibility with what
Yes.
we do with that reusable chunk of content, right? So it made, like when we decided to organize things based on the SFI pillars, we just like shuffled them around. It wasn't a huge chunk of text that we had to copy, paste, and move. We were just working with this one reusable chunk and point to that. And then our next phase that we've talked about is now taking that reusable chunk of content and placing it in its like home content. So it's going to meet the reader if they're not even looking at the check. That recommendation, that base level best practice is going to live wherever it's applicable within all the docs. So logs content, ID protection, devices, authentication, we're going to start to sprinkle that around. And so now we have this really strong base, best practice that's going to be, it's going to be in your face everywhere, but for a good reason.
But the great thing is instead of us having to rewrite that in some varying way, it will be the same piece of content that you see everywhere.
Right.
So you're not going to get a different explanation or a different best practice in 10 different places.
That's, I think, the thing to celebrate the most. Kudos to all of this brilliant work, honestly. First of all, those of you consuming the Zero Trust Assessment, great news. You're not reading Tarek's flowery language and Meryl's amazing English. You're reading the docs, the same docs that if you had Googled how to secure my tenant, you'd land on this amazing article. You're reading the same content, the box that says why you should secure your app credentials this way is exactly the same box in that article. We're pulling it live into the tool at the moment when we're showing you that check and why you should fix it. And they are our amazing docs team are the best people to also reference you the articles from there. They're like, oh, how to set up CA for this, how to do this, how to delete this credential. They know all the other docs that contribute to this check, and they route it. So the great news for all of you consuming this is if you later on write an LLM or an agent that's answers a question of how do I secure this Entra, you'll get the same exact answer in the tool, in the LLM, as in the docs themselves when you read it yourself. So that's kind of, we work super hard to be consistent across the board. It is, I want to say for your listeners, it is innovative stuff that's not been done before. That's the first time I'm kind of trying to do this stuff. So it's really cool.
Yeah, and as docs writers, we sit in the UX org within security. And so it's kind of cool to be like really doing UX work along with our content work as our day job.
Sarah and John, you also, so in the doc, every test, we tell you, what are the things you need to fix. Then it says, what was checked in the test. Why did it fail or why did it pass? Why is it important? And then there's a bunch of remediation links that goes to the actual docs. You actually did a lot of work to make sure that the remediation, when you land on a remediation saying you need to do this conditional access or you need to do this to revoke permissions, there's a lot more you did as well, right?
We want to make sure that you get to the right article that takes
I think
with the process and not just an overview, like what is conditional access? Like that's not helpful. So we want to make sure that we get people to the exact right content. And if it doesn't exist, that's a work item to do later too.
Yeah, and we've pushed some of the work back to individual writers to say, hey, we have this recommendation, your content doesn't match up, we need to make a change here. We had that within B2B. We had a couple of spaces where we made some changes early on, and as we went through, we would get a little bit of pushback, and we'd explain things, and people were jumping right on board when we would ask for updates to be made.
Yeah, that's what I found amazing about by going through this process. We also put in an SFI Zero Trust hat on in our default documentation. So it brings those secure by default, even in if you're just generally reading through a feature. Now there are all those flavors of, what is that secure Zero Trust way of doing,
Exactly.
setting up guests.
A lot of the docs are kind of sometimes overly focused on deploy this new feature and here's how to turn it on. Now there's a more angle to them. Either some section in the same article, whatever, how to secure it, how to deploy it securely, how to lock it down, or how to do it, how to check if something's wrong with it, that kind of stuff, which I think is a great addition to the learned content in general, whether or not to use the assessment, right?
One of the themes I see as I was building this and what users and the audience would see when they run this report, there's a lot of focus on privileged users and there's a lot of focus on apps, credentials and inactive apps and all of that. What was sort of the driving thing behind that focus on those two things?
I'll jump in on the privilege aspect. If a user has an admin role, I feel like they have the keys to your kingdom. So focusing on anyone who has one of those roles specifically and starting there, I feel like it helps reduce your attack surface area so much by securing those users. We talk about emergency access accounts, break glass accounts a lot in conditional access. Making sure that those are configured right, making sure that anyone who has an admin role is using the right role, not just give everyone global administrator. And if you're doing that, please stop. But giving them the right role. And we did we focused on that in Entra was every time you see steps from us, you should see the steps for the least privileged role. We had already started on that. We were already well down the path of that in Entra content. And we're trying to push that to other teams as we go to really embrace that zero trust principle and enforce least privilege across the board. That's one of our key SFI things is least privilege and security. And so it just made sense to continue that and focus on that for customers because that's definitely a pain point for people.
I think to add to that, I think Meryl and John, it's one of the learnings from SFI, from Secure Fisher Initiative. And I want to tie it to something recently I heard, I think, Charlie Bell, our executive vice president, the head of Microsoft Security. He was having a conversation with Vasu, our head of marketing for security. And the point is, everybody keeps asking about, what about AI? AI attacks. AI is coming. AI is going to destroy us. True, it is a concern. But the point is, AI is just going to be really good at scanning your tenant, much more thorough than a human being. AI is able to parse data at scale better than humans can. It is the one advantage, obviously, one clear advantage, right? Is ability to kind of parse data at a large scale, right? And so ultimately, the problem of defending against AI is a problem of being thorough in how you check yourself. That's and in my mind, that is the greatest value of the tool. And so we prioritized the privilege checks because that is what the AI will see first. Is, oh, look at that. You've got a service principal with just a password on it, and you left it in the global admin role from 8 years ago, back when that was the only way to give it delete permissions. And you no longer have to do that, but you forgot. And you just left it there. The AI will find it before you do. We're trying to give you the tool so that you can find it before the AI does. That's ultimately what it's about. The same thing with users, same thing with applications, credentials. A lot of these checks about high privilege, what we call HPA, high privilege access, is a lot of this. This is what a lot of SFI is about, is that us having good rigor and hygiene ourselves in how we produce least privileged things, how we keep things least privileged. And that's also, I believe, is most of our customers' problem. Is also same thing, is how do you notice and see and react to HPA quickly?
And I think if you see lots of checks that involve app creds or privilege, that just tells you how many doors that opens. And it's prevalent, that's for sure. I mean, you can see it, you'll see that pattern in the checks, but that's just how big of a deal it is.
Yeah, just today I saw someone post saying he ran the assessment and I have like hundreds of apps with expired creds. But is it a problem? He's asking like, oh, these apps are there, but they expired. So they expired, right? Like the attacker can't use them. It's not that much of a problem, which we know lots of tenants are in that same state where the apps are no longer maybe in use and the cred is expired. Even in our log, we explicit in the assessment, we call out unused apps. We see when the credential was last used to sign in. We call out those apps as well. They are not being used by users, or it's not being used. And we highlight all of that, which was an interesting thing to see now people starting to realize that they need to do a lot more governance on those.
Yeah, tenant
apps and so
hygiene
on.
is a thing. Tenant hygiene issues are definitely a thing. We've got our test tenants and making sure that we keep people who need access in, and people who no longer need access, get rid of them. That's definitely a thing. And same thing with apps and service principals. Yeah.
I think if someone is specifically asking about that one is, yes, an expired credential is really a marker for an unused app. First of all, if you got all these expired creds on the app, is the app actually being used? And the second is, it's an outage problem, because you could have rolled the secret on 90% of your front ends, but not 10%. They're still using the old cred. Like, that's why keep it there. Like, that's the whole point. Is it tells you a lot about the hygiene of the app maintenance itself, right?
Yeah, and the reason I was telling him was these nation state actors, we've seen them, they want to be hidden and stay stealthy. So when you have a mix of active and inactive apps, it leaves it open for them to go in if they ever get in to add creds and stay hidden. And then the app suddenly becomes active and you think you can't tell the difference between ones that were inactive and then went active. It's like a much harder
To your point, if
problem.
the threat actor comes in and adds a second credential, and now you look at the app and there's 2 active credentials and 7 expired, right? You're not seeing the bad credential, the second one.
Correct.
You're seeing all this noise, this junk. You ideally want to clean the unused one so that you see that there's 2, not 1, and that you ask yourself, what's the second one? Is it that is that the next cred, or is that a shady credential that got added later, right?
Yeah. And just today now, team meeting, someone was sharing as well, right? Like, it's not at the nation states, they're not, they're targeting like even commercial companies, they're targeting infrastructure. Like, it's not just governments that need to worry about like
I think if you look at the latest MDDR, Microsoft Digital Defense Report, they have, I think, what was it, 40% or something that they call drive-by compromise. Right, you are in your tenant. You're happy somebody compromised your tenant to jump to someone else. You're shot on their way to shoot the person.
Cool. So we are almost at the top of the hour. What are your final closing thoughts?
I think Intune can be pretty overwhelming because not just the number of policies, but just the number of settings within the policies, and just becomes too difficult if you're taking over a new environment. I would say, even if it's a new environment or an existing environment, just go ahead and run the tool. Please go ahead and run the tool. This is going to give you the insights that's going to take you hours and hours to find. It's just going to be in your fingertips in minutes and very little effort. So that's my take on it. You want to secure it? Yes. Even if you don't want to secure it, just get the insights from this tool. It's going to be amazing.
Nice.
I'll say that, please run it. That's the number one thing we would love from you is to run it, give us feedback, help us learn, help us understand more. We think it's highly useful. Would love to be challenged by this as well, but also we'd love to learn how you're using it. So please give us feedback. I know, comment on his podcast, on his YouTube videos, send him direct messages on LinkedIn, spam barrel all you want. Help us learn and understand how you're using it and how it's been helpful for you. Ultimately, our evil malicious goal is to make zero trust practical, but it's not just a buzzword. It's really about how do I secure myself end to end across identity devices. We're trying to help you also, you folks, break the silos within your organizations. A lot of the bad guys live between your cracks, right? And so we're trying to help you also see that this is okay in Entra and not okay in Intune. I need to bridge the gap, or the other way around, right? So we're just eager for your feedback. That's what.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to see what's next.